We've seen some major protests at Capitol Hill during the Israeli Prime Minister's address to Congress, Michael.
Yeah, Lisa, James, good morning. Benjamin Netanyahu had addressed a joint sitting of Congress this afternoon. The war in Gaza, not surprisingly, front and centre, the Israeli PM saying victory for Israel was in sight. At the same time, thousands of protesters gathered outside the US Capitol to express their anger at Israel's conduct of the war. We've got both angles covered this morning. Let's go first to Jay McMillan, our US Bureau Chief, on the streets outside the US Capitol. Jay, good morning. How intense have the protests got?
The entire US Capitol grounds are blocked off. There is fencing right around the building. There are police officers, some in riot gear, really lining up against that fencing. These protesters couldn't get anywhere near where Benjamin Netanyahu was speaking, but this rally started this morning, local time, a few blocks down from where we are now. There was speeches, people gathered, and then as we got closer to that speech getting underway, people marched up. There were some clashes between protesters and police. We saw some people who had been pepper sprayed. We've just been up at Union Station. That's a local landmark here. It's a big train station, and that is where we saw some of the protesters climbing up onto flagpoles, taking down the American flags that would normally be flying outside Union Station. They were replaced with Palestinian flags. We also saw what looked like an effigy of Benjamin Netanyahu being burned and a number of people being arrested. So that group has now moved from there, looks like heading back towards this protest began. But we did speak to some people earlier about why they'd come out. This is what they had to say.
I can't comprehend a criminal like Netanyahu to be, allowed to talk in the Congress here.
He's getting better security than we had in the State of the Union when they were doing our own internal stuff when we were protesting there.
So, Michael, things appear to have calmed down, at least where we are for the moment, but there is still a very heavy police presence, and there will be for a couple of days to come. Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting with President Joe Biden tomorrow at the White House. There have been protests ever since the Israeli Prime Minister arrived.
Jade McMillan, let's take you inside the US Capitol building now to Carrington Clark. Carrington, you were there for Mr Netanyahu's speech. What to you stood out?
Well, it was an extraordinarily combative speech. I think the question coming into today is whether or not we would hear more of a tone of reconciliation or perhaps movement when it comes to a ceasefire agreement. But instead, the speech that Benjamin Netanyahu gave to this joint sitting of Congress was really that of a wartime president who was prosecuting the case that nothing less than total victory would be enough for him and for the Israeli people. But he also wanted to frame what is occurring in Gaza and the Israeli bombardment of Gaza as being part of a wider war and putting Iran at the centre of that, and said that Israel is fighting this war not only on behalf of itself but also for America.
We meet today at a crossroads of history. Our world is in upheaval. In the Middle East, Iran's axis of terror confronts America, Israel, and our Arab friends. This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization. For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together.
Now, what was fascinating was watching how this was received in the chamber. The Republican side was uniform, applauding almost every utterance that we heard from the Israeli Prime Minister. We're up on their feet for, it seemed, the majority of that speech. On the Democratic side, you could see a real divide. There were probably half the Democrats in the chamber were almost as enthused as the Republican side. Maybe a quarter of the Democrats were very reluctant to applaud anything he said. And then there was maybe a quarter there that seemed to be torn. And you could see this kind of constant looking around from the members at their colleagues to see what they were and weren't standing for. And it really does sum up the divide that we're currently seeing in the United States. Support for Israel has been mostly bipartisan for decades, but this divide between the Republicans and particularly the progressive Democrats is becoming more and more stark as this war continues on. It's now 10 months in. There's been a huge human toll, and many of the members of Congress are just fed up with how this war is being prosecuted, and they want to hear that there is progress towards a ceasefire to see the carnage end. Importantly, within the chamber, we did see Rashida Tlaib. She's a member of the House of Representatives. She's a Palestinian American. We didn't believe she would be showing up. We thought she'd be one of those Democrats and a couple of Republicans who had said that they wouldn't show up to this particular address. Instead, she did, but she protested in her own way. She had a small black sign accusing Benjamin Netanyahu of being a war criminal and also guilty of genocide, which she would hold up through different parts of his speech. But you could see that Benjamin Netanyahu is sensitive to the protests that were occurring outside. He referenced them repeatedly and accused the protesters of being the youthful idiots of the Iranian regime.
Carrington Clark and Jade McMillan, thank you both. And Lisa, as Jade mentioned, the focus turns to here tomorrow when Benjamin Netanyahu meets Joe Biden at the White House. I can tell you extra security in terms of more fencing, more police have been put in place ahead of that meeting. And also tonight, the focus is very much on the White House in about 4 hours' time when Joe Biden gives that nationally televised address explaining to Americans just why he has bowed out of the presidential race.